Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this panel on Turkish foreign policy. Turkish foreign policy is a very big and exciting topic. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Amanda Paul, and I work at a think tank in Brussels called the European Policy Centre, where I lead our program on Ukraine, the wider Black Sea region, and Turkey. Now, I'm quite an old person, and I started to work on Turkey around 20 years ago. And if you look at the evolution of Turkish foreign policy from then until now, it's hardly recognizable. 20 years ago was on the eve of Turkey about to start negotiations to join the EU. They had met all of the Copenhagen criteria. Nowadays, they barely meet the Copenhagen criteria. And also what's very interesting is in those days, Turkey's alignment with the EU's common foreign and security policy was very high. I think it was around 90%, which is not the case today. For those of you that follow this issue, you probably already know that I think it's around 15% or maybe less. This is a sort of reflection of how Turkey has changed how it does foreign policy. Back in those days, Turkey was very much, let's say, an ally of the West, a staunch ally. To some points, the Americans would say jump, and Ankara would say how high. Those days have gone. Turkish foreign policy has become very independent. Turkey's gone from being, I would say, a soft power actor, or that's how it was defined then, to more of a hard power actor and more of a transactional actor. So the idea of today's discussion is to really look at this evolution. What does it mean? I mean, for Turkey, but for its partners, for the rest of the world. I mean, there's barely a country where Turkey doesn't have its finger in their geopolitical pie, so to speak. And on this panel, we really have an excellent group of experts on Turkey to talk about this, who I'm going to introduce very briefly. First of all, to my right, James Kerr Lindsay, who is I think a senior fellow at the European Institute and at the London School of Economics. Welcome to you, James. Please correct me if I got your job title wrong. Pinar Dost, who's a non-resident fellow and former deputy director of the Atlantic Council of Turkey. And Nilgün Arısan Eralp, who is director at the Centre of the European Union Studies. So welcome to all of you. It's a great pleasure to see you here today. Sinem, yes, I'm sorry, Sinem, how could I forget you? My text is out of order at the end of the day, of course. Sinem Adar at the Centre for Applied Turkey Studies, or CATS as it's known, at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Welcome to all of you. I want to start with you, James. I mean, I'm beginning to regret now not doing what Mustafa Aydin did, just give everybody 2 questions. Makes the life of the moderator easier, but I didn't, so we're going to mix it up. So I want to start with you, James. If you could give us a sort of picture of what the main drivers and aims of Turkey's foreign policy are today. I'm going to give everybody around, let's say 5 minutes for a few questions each, and then we're going to go to the floor. I don't know why you're laughing.
I'm just laughing to sort of give a quick driver of Turkey's foreign policy, and I think the whole problem is that none of us really know. And I was listening to when you were saying you've been looking at Turkey for 20 years, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm coming up for 35 years at looking at Turkish foreign policy now.
That makes me very young.
We're all in competition here. I can see for how long we've been frustrated by this. But I think the broad point in all of this is that, and this probably made more of an impact a few years ago, but there were very, very few countries that you could identify which had actually undergone such a profound change in their foreign policy orientation as Turkey. I say maybe less these days. We are living in incredibly uncertain times, and I think, we're seeing this in all sorts of ways. In my own country, Britain, of course, the way that it's completely upended its relationship with the world with Brexit, for example, I have to work that in. But I think with Turkey, it was, when I first started to look at Turkey, it was a very, very different place in all sorts. For old-timers, I always contest when I speak to somebody if they have worked on Turkey for a long time, because as soon as you start to mention people like Tansu Çiller, for example, and ANAP and DYP, and if they look at you blankly, they are right, okay, you're an Erdogan foreign policy Turkey person, you don't remember the chaos of the 90s, go back and look at it. But it was very much a case that, I remember when I started looking at Turkish foreign policy, you're right, it was completely oriented towards the West. And I remember thinking, what was really interesting is you actually had three very distinct community of Turkey foreign policy scholars. The vast majority were those who looked at the West, who were looking at Turkey's relationship with NATO, with the European Union. You then had a smaller community who would look at the relationship with the Soviet Union, the Central Asian republics, and then you'd have a tiny little group who would look at Turkey's relationship with the Middle East, and perhaps maybe the Islamic world. And there were very few, and certainly almost, I think from a Western perspective, the only scholar I can think of who was regularly working on that was Philip Robbins. Over at St. Antony's, who wrote a fantastic book on Turkey and the Middle East at a time when no one else was looking at it. And of course, you look at that relationship today that Turkey has with the wider world, and it has completely changed. I think, we see this very complex, downgraded relationship between Turkey and the West, a very distrustful relationship. You see a very complex relationship between Turkey and Russia, which blows hot and cold and is a subject of a great deal of suspicion, obviously, amongst Turkey's Western partners. You have this fascinating development in Central Asia and Turkey's attempt to take leadership in the Turkic world and building on that, which is developing. And then, of course, you've seen this 180 degree turn on Turkey and the Middle East, which has obviously gone in fits and starts, positive, less positive, but to see how that was something that actually, I think of all of these, changed first. I think as soon as AKP came to power, we saw that very much. In fact, Turkey's first foreign minister, when they took power, was a very unusual figure in that he had been an ambassador in the Middle East when traditionally it would have been an ambassador from a European country. Yes, exactly. And so that was a very early indication. But now what we're seeing is obviously Turkey taking a much more active role in the Middle East, or was trying to, certainly at the time of the Arab Spring. And then, of course, we saw the interesting development in terms of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation and the fact that Turkey had the chairmanship in office of the organization, but also held, it was a Turkish national who was the Secretary General of the organization. So we've seen a really, really interesting development. But I think, what I would say is that the problem we run into today is that I don't think anyone really knows where Turkey sees itself, and it's spreading itself so thinly that all it's doing is breeding distrust, because you're seeing now you have Turkey, which obviously remains a candidate for EU membership. It's a NATO member, but at the same time, it's trying to take some sort of leadership role in the Islamic world, and how much so we can contest this, and there are obviously very many other countries which would see themselves playing that role: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Indonesia, Pakistan. But it quite clearly, Erdogan sees himself doing, playing that sort of role, but is mistrusted because he's still got this relationship with NATO and wants to be in there. At the same time, He's mistrusted by NATO members because we now have a leader who's talking quite openly, and I think again people could question how sincere this is, about joining the BRICS, which is quite clearly, although some would say the BRICS don't define themselves against the West, I think we can all say that, well, that's exactly how they define themselves. And when you have Turkey sort of saying, well, we're open to the idea, and it's just an economic club. No, it's far more than that, and the optics of this are so much more serious. And then you have the relationship between Turkey and Russia, which many people don't trust as well. What is Erdogan trying to do with this? And then you've got this strange competition over what the relationship between Turkey and Russia is going to be in Central Asia. So I think, this is what's so perplexing for so many of us who look at Turkey, is to try and get a fix on where it is today. We knew at one point, those of us who looked at it for many years, 20 years ago, we were clear, yes, there were occasional issues, and Turkey was never quite as on board with the West as it might have liked to present itself. There were always problems going back to the 60s, question of Cyprus in the 70s, of course. So there were problems, but we had a much greater fix. And I think that just looking at it today, I just don't know where Turkey really sees itself. And I think that none of its partners in any of these different groupings will also be able to say, well, this is where we see Turkey going.
Thank you, James. I think you raised a lot of questions there that we can come back to in a minute. But I want to come to Pinar now, because, yes, what's going on in Turkey is in sort of upheaval, to put it mildly. But at the same time, we're also seeing a global upheaval. I mean, when the sort of period of a unipolar world is over, we've moved to a sort of fragmented system, and nobody actually knows how that's going to end. I mean, we're in a sort of interim stage, if I can put it that way. And it seems to me that Türkiye is trying to take advantage of this sort of potential new world order, which isn't only led by the United States. So my question to you would be, I mean, how do you view how Turkey is sort of adopting itself to this new reality, and how is that sort of resembled in its policies? I mean, where do we see a continuation of, let's say, the ruling AKP's parties from the past and now? I mean, obviously, they're no longer a one-party government, because you also have the nationalists and whatnot. But how do you see that evolving, or how has it changed things?
Yeah, thank you. So let's think about how we got there, and let's try to explain better all this question by James. So I believe simply Turkey benefited from the opportunity presented by this transition moment from the unipolar world to multipolar world. And this opportunity was presented actually by the US as the hegemon power, by US hesitancy to take responsibilities in many important issues. And Turkey is the other emerging middle countries, as the title of our panel reflects, is pursuing an autonomous foreign policy, is self-confident, refusing to align with one or the other varying parties, and takes benefit out of this policy. And these emerging middle powers are acting on their self-interest. So Turkey is one of these countries. And its name is mainly mentioned with Brazil, India, Indonesia, South Africa, Vietnam. But we also have other middle powers in the developed world, such as Canada, South Korea, but also energy-rich countries such as Saudi Arabia, or smaller states like Qatar, UAE, and also Israel we can count. And let's remember a couple of actions by these middle powers, autonomous action, like we saw Israel refusing to take a clear stance against Russia at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and even denying to sell weapons long time to Ukraine, or India's very much hesitancy to take a clear stance against Russia and continuing to buying oil from Russia, or even Gulf countries' normalization efforts with Assad. I mean, not even efforts, normalization, or EU's now normalization efforts. So the list is very long. I can give other examples. But there's obviously, and also even EU strategic autonomy, I mean, and with regarding the China trade and also EU security and defense policies. What makes Turkey different from all these emerging middle powers? Turkey is the only NATO member country, and Turkey is the only EU candidate country. So Turkey has not that luxury to act that autonomously as regard to its allies, obviously. So that's why India's buying S-400 is not so much on the spot, but when Turkey buys S-400, defense system is very much on the spot. But how Turkey is doing this? So what is the policy followed by the AKP? So we can start with the balancing act, obviously, this famous balancing act, as James also laid out, for example, in the Russia-Ukraine relationship. But I would say the balancing act is not a new policy created under AKP rule, because this is a very much traditional Turkish foreign policy, and I would say even Ottoman foreign policy as a historian. Turkey always played one power against the other in the big struggles, and always recorded the fruits of this policy. I mean, the biggest example in history is the Second World War, Turkish foreign policy. Turkey ended up being the biggest army, having the biggest army in the Balkans, for example, at the end of the Second World War, and didn't attend the war at all. Another way we can define this policy is Turkey's willingness to become a regional player, important regional player, but also with global ambitions. So Turkey, I mean, in previous administration, for example, under after the end of the Cold War, like Prime Minister Özal time, we saw this opening with former Soviet countries like the Balkans, and also in the Central Asia. It started by then, actually. It's not new. It's true that Prime Minister Özal, but also Foreign Minister İsmail Cem, for example, wanted to develop, engage with the Middle East in the past. But it wasn't possible at that time. It's true that during the AKP, this became a clear policy and it was applied. And also in the past, and there are new territories involved now, like South Asia and Southeast Asia, or Africa. But the difference also, I believe, in the past, it's mostly through soft power elements that Turkey was developing its relations, like trade, cultural links. But today we see more and more hard power instruments in play. Not only the operations Turkey got involved, but also Turkey's increasing military footprint in many geographies, with military bases posts in Iraq, Qatar, Somalia, but also Turkey is joining military development training programs and becoming also an important arms producer now, to the point of becoming 12th largest arms exporter globally, to the point of competing with China as a future competitor for China in the Middle East, becoming UAE's first arms exporter. So there are a lot of developments. We can see the signals in the AKP government, but obviously there are also, this all became capable, I mean, possible with some capacity increasing, but obviously there are some limits to this capacity, especially the economic dependencies that Turkey has, more importantly with Russia. So it prevents Turkey to completely follow
Turkey has applied for BRICS. There's an upcoming summit in 3 weeks in Kazan in Russia. It's not clear to me whether or not Turkey will be there. But Turkey is certainly not the only country to actually apply to BRICS. I mean, we've seen a huge amount of countries, I think it's 40 or 50 countries from around the world actually apply. So from your perspective, I mean, what is it that Turkey wants to get out of being part of the BRICS, if it would be allowed to actually get in? But more generally, I mean, why are we seeing this trend of countries actually wanting to be part of BRICS? And is it something that the West, if I can still call it the West, should be concerned about?
Thank you, Amanda. Before I come to the answer to your question, I'll just basically kind of lay out a general framework to kind of for you to make sense of the answer better. And that actually the framework has to do with the previous two questions, kind of. And I have 4 points to make before the BRICS part. First is that, like when we look at the last 22 years since the rise of the AKP into power, I think Turkish, both the aspirations in foreign policy, but also the zigzagging in foreign policy, because we see a lot of that, has been significantly shaped by Turkey's late Cold War, post-Cold War aspirations that go back as early as to Turgut Özal, to the 1980s. Economic opportunities that were there, especially in the 2000s, increased confidence, especially driven by the idea of a Muslim democracy that could pose a model to the Middle East. Ideology, especially in the 2010s after the Arab uprisings. And last but not least, regime interests, especially more saliently since 2016. So this is kind of, I think, the general pillars of Turkish foreign policy aspirations, but also the zigzagging in it and both the tactical and the strategic turns in it. And to a large extent, I mean, the title of the panel is, we are trying to kind of make sense of Turkish foreign policy in a changing world. And then I think the kind of the timeline matters, right? Are we, like, when do we start the change? Does this change start when Russia invaded Ukraine, or do we go back as early as 2003 when the US invaded Iraq? That was followed by Russian invasion of Georgia in 2008, and then comes the NATO-led coalition in Libya, then Obama's red lines that were not followed in Syria, 2014 Russian invasion of Crimea, and it goes on. And I think throughout all this period, actually, Turkey saw opportunities for itself. First and foremost, to fill a vacuum of power, but also norms, eroding norms. Secondly, especially after the 2008 financial crisis, that was a very significant moment for Turkey, and that goes back to what I said earlier about the economic opportunities, because this rush of financial flows really boosted the confidence of the ruling elites in Ankara, and I think which led to actually their quite bold moves in the aftermath of the Arab uprisings. And in a way, kind of the post-Arab uprising era was an era in which Turkey kind of did not hesitate, and quite the opposite, quite boldly tried to position itself as a promoter of democracy in the region, basically advocating elected Muslim Brotherhood governments. But at the same time, kind of combined it with ideology and tried to position itself as the leader of the Muslim world. And that kind of like those two things, when you combine them together, that really doesn't stick together. Because on the one hand, you kind of advocate a value-based foreign policy, so to speak, but then at the same time, you constantly undermine yourself by sticking to an ideology, and by doing that, by being partial. And last but not least, especially after the 2016, that rhetoric about positioning Turkey as the leader of the Muslim world, interestingly merged with the rhetoric of positioning Turkey as the defender of the marginalized populations across the world. And in a way, kind of Turkey trying to position itself as a counter-hegemonic, anti-systemic actor that is trying to kind of constantly criticizing the UN system, the world is bigger than five, etc., etc. So these are kind of the ways in which I think Turkey has been trying to benefit and the constantly changing world in the last 15 to 20 years. But coming to 2022, I think it has reached its limits, and therefore, and there are different reasons for that, partially Turkey-related, partially region-related. And there you see the first shift in foreign policy with the normalization efforts, mainly in the region, with the Gulf states, Egypt, and then comes Greece, etc., etc. And the last 1.5, 2 years, the realization that even though there is an aspiration under the name of strategic autonomy to decrease Turkey's dependency on its Western allies, I think increasingly since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there is a significant realization that breaking that path dependency is extremely difficult if not impossible, first and foremost for economic reasons, but also for defense reasons. Despite all the talk about having an autonomous defense industry, 20% of the Turkish defense industry still remains dependent, and that 20% is the most critical part of the defense industry, which basically is about producing subsystems, high technology products, etc. And there Turkey is dependent on its Western allies. Now, after this very long introduction to the question, BRICS. Now, the official answer, or the answer to your question, or if I were Hakan Fidan sitting here, I would say that, well, because of the fact that Turkey's EU journey didn't go very well, we are now looking for alternatives. So that's kind of like the official narrative. I think there is more to that. If we work with the assumption that this was actually a kind of strategically developed decision, I'm not sure whether it is, and I'm not even sure whether there is kind of coherency within Ankara about BRICS membership, so I think one should really keep that in mind. But assuming that there is coherency about the BRICS membership, I can think of actually 3 possible reasons, and they kind of coexist with one another. One is, of course, given the economic woes, modernization of the customs union, I think, has been one of the things that Turkey really wanted to happen, at least start the conversation in that in the last couple of years. That is not happening for obvious reasons. But okay, if it is not happening, at least let us take some foreign direct investment from Europe. And that's also not happening, at least in the way and at the level that Ankara would be happy with. So I think that's kind of like the economic reasons. But in addition to that, there was an interview that Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan gave a couple of weeks ago at a Turkish TV program. And there actually he said something really interesting after that official narrative that if Turkey were an EU member that we wouldn't have basically looked for alternatives. After that he said, well, actually we also do not want to fall behind. Now all these countries are basically all other countries are becoming members of BRICS, and we do not want to fall behind. So I think that's kind of like, and I think he was genuine when he said it, as clumsy as it might have sounded, like not wanting to fall behind. And in that context, I think one should kind of entertain the idea, and this is more like a hypothesis, I'm not 100% sure about that, but when you look at the most recent members of BRICS, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, now Saudi Arabia is offered, not sure whether it will take it or not. These are all the countries that Turkey has been trying to normalize relations with. I think that also plays a role there in the context of not wanting to fall behind. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. I will continue with the topic because I'd like to ask you how you could see the response from Turkey's traditional allies, from the EU, from the United States and whatnot, and NATO, in the event that Turkey actually does attend the BRICS summit. I mean, would you foresee any consequences? Could this further impact the relations with the EU? I mean, sometimes I have the impression they're looking for any reason to further downgrade ties. I mean, how should the EU and the US actually deal with this?
First of all, I have to state that Turkey hasn't made it of Turkey. I keep confusing.
Yeah.
So Turkey hasn't made an official declaration regarding its application to BRICS. We heard it from Russian forces. And very recently, again, we heard from Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov that they are not ready for enlargements. So this means that Turkey will not become a BRICS member in the short or medium term. Actually, this should be a frustration or embarrassment for a country, maybe knowing that they haven't made an official declaration regarding their application to BRICS. Even before the application to BRICS, right after NATO summit in July, right before the NATO summit in July, in early July, Erdogan, our president, participated in the summit of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, not BRICS, but Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a defense and security organization. And Turkey has made its interest in this organization very public. And then, what is the reaction of the West to it? First of all, we haven't heard anything from Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We heard from Lavrov that BRICS is not ready for enlargement. I think the West, especially EU and NATO, hasn't taken Turkey very seriously in these applications. And there are two factors that led Turkey to lead a multidimensional foreign policy. One is push factor from the West, especially from the EU. The second is the idea of making use of this emerging multipolar, pluripolar world. Can Turkey do it? First of all, let me question that. I don't think Turkey can become an influential middle power or have strategic autonomy. All the countries are after strategic autonomy, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that. EU is discussing that, all of the countries discussing that. The first factor that will not make Turkey an influential player in the world, middle power in the world, is that unfortunately domestic politics is the main determinant of Turkish foreign policy. Sometimes domestic politics push Turkey to take action to implement policies that are against the global trends. Turkey was right to criticize Netanyahu's treatment of Palestinians as it is a massacre, but Turkey was totally wrong to declare that Hamas is a freedom fighter. That is just an opposite of the global and religious trends. Even Arab countries don't say that Hamas is a freedom fighter. And I don't want to touch upon Cyprus, that has been discussed, but insisting on two-state solution, although Turkey in the early 2000s defended the solution, Annan Plan, and Turkey was very constructive in Crans-Montana, now defending a two-state solution results in presenting Christodoulides as a pro-solution leader, because the world is looking for peace in this region, and the insistence on Turkey on a two-state solution presents Turkey as against a solution in Cyprus. So the second factor, Turkey doesn't have competitive power. We are dependent on Russia for energy. We are dependent on China in terms of trade. We are totally dependent on the West, especially in EU, for our trade and for foreign direct investment and for technology. We don't have our national resources. In a way, I'm happy that we are not suffering from national resource curse, like countries like Iran. Technology-wise, we are backwards. We have dependent on the technology transfer. There was a third factor. The third factor, Turkish decision makers believe that the West is over. No, the West is not over. Maybe the world is not West-centric that much, but we cannot say that we are in a post-Western world. No, that's not true. And maybe there's a fourth factor. Unfortunately, the decisions regarding Turkish foreign policy is not institutionalized. We have to confess that. One man gives all the decisions. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with all its know-how, with all its experience, is pushed aside. So that's why we cannot be an influential middle power, I think. And EU, knowing that, although also they respect Turkey's geostrategic position, Turkey's resources in ammunition, in military power. EU is discussing nowadays strategic autonomy in defense, thinking that if Trump comes to power, again there will be isolationist foreign policy of United States. But EU hasn't opened the way to have a structural dialogue with Turkey in foreign and security policy. Until now, Turkish foreign minister was invited only to one Gimnik meeting last August, and that was the main idea was to discuss Cyprus because of the upcoming UN General Assembly. that it was told that Guterres will bring the parties together in New York. And just before Hakan Fidan was invited to Gimnik meeting, the still High Representative of Foreign Policy, Josep Borrell, gave a speech in Spain. His speech title was Quo Vadis Europe, and he said that Europe doesn't exist in Libya, in Mediterranean anymore. Unfortunately, we see Russia and Turkey in North Africa and Libya. So how can such an EU can talk about a cooperation with Turkey in foreign and security policy when its high representative can make such a statement? Turkey applied to be a part of PESCO. You know, PESCO was established in 2017, right after Trump came to power. It was a permanent structured cooperation in defense among member states, but it was open to non-member states. UK applied, UK was accepted, but Turkey's application hasn't been handled until now. Also, if I'm not wrong, after Russian aggression, Russian invasion in Ukraine, EU has published a strategic compass. It was its defense strategy. Turkey was put in the same basket with Russia and China in that strategy. So Turkey is a virtual candidate, and apart from being a virtual candidate, it's not even a strategic partner for the EU anymore. Is this a mistake? Yes, I think it's a mistake, because Turkey can be engaged with. And if Turkey is engaged, Turkey can be constructive, Turkey can make enhance the defense structures of the EU. And Erdogan is I have my reservations with Erdogan because of the domestic policy, because of the backsliding in democracy, but Erdogan is a pragmatic person. EU wants to engage with Turkey, but EU making preconditions for engagement with Turkey. I'll stop here. Like, I look at the Borrell report. Borrell was asked to prepare a report regarding how EU would proceed with Turkey in cooperation. There was this title, Cooperation in Foreign and Security Policy, and Turkey's alignment rate with the EU's foreign and security policy is 10%, declined from 80%. So precondition for the foreign and security policy cooperation is Turkey's alignment rate should be increased. If you cannot cooperate with Turkey in foreign and security policy, how do you expect this alignment rate to increase? So you put the horse before the carts. I don't think that's a wise strategy. I'll stop here and I'll continue in the second round.
No, thank you. It's not a wise strategy, but the issue with the EU is that it desires to be a geostrategic power. They keep repeating this sort of slogan: we want to be an impactful geopolitical actor. But unfortunately, up until now, we haven't actually seen very much of that. As you all know, we're about to start the new institutional cycle, which will bring a whole new set of commissioners, a new parliament or whatnot, the new leaders. Some of the new leaders, the new Borrell, Mrs. Callas. One can hope that they can be more effective and more visionary when it comes to foreign policy. But again, a lot depends on the positioning, or everything depends on the positioning of member states.
Sure.
So this is something that remains to be seen.
One last thing, I'm so sorry,
I need to go back to, I want to go back to...
as you refer to the new institutional structure, if I'm not wrong, Turkey will be handled not in the enlargement package, but in the Mediterranean package.
I don't think I think that was a misunderstanding.
Okay.
From the famous lunch with Hakan Fidan. No, Turkey would never accept that, and it shouldn't. But I want to come back to you, James. We can touch on some of these issues again at the moment, because Turkey used to have what they call the blue homeland policy. It wasn't mentioned earlier today when we were talking about Greece and Cyprus. But is this still something that exists?
Yeah, I think most here were in the last session, and I think we were all desperately hoping that one or other of them was going to reveal what this settlement,
And nobody
you know,
did.
because they all seem to say we know what it is, but I can't say. I think they were all terrified of the fact that if they said it out loud, then they'd be sort of written up in their national press as the traitor who's given away the solution, and you know, the Greek who's admitted. But the reality is that there is an ongoing problem between Greece and Turkey that has got to be addressed in terms of maritime delimitation. I think it's long been one of these situations where you can see both being in the right, both being in the wrong. Turkey has taken a lot of unilateral steps which have been incredibly unhelpful, but at the same time one can understand a country the size of Turkey with as much coastline as Turkey has, and then you draw up a map that, according to the strict letter of international law, would reveal just how much territorial waters it has. It's substantially less than one would expect. And in many ways, though, you can solve this problem at a stroke by Greece just accepting a deal on Castellorizo, which I think is really essentially what most people are expecting, that Greece says, listen, we won't make a claim here, you don't make a claim in the Aegean, we draw that line, let's be done. But nobody wanted to go on record and say that that is ultimately the settlement that I think everyone's looking at. But, you know, I think as somebody who now lives here in Cyprus and has worked on Cyprus and seen that we do need to see some sort of movement on it, and whether that improved relationship between Greece and Turkey is the way of unlocking it, and the way to unlock that is to unlock the Aegean and try and get some movement on that. You know, it is a real problem. So, but I think the broader point that you raise about this blue homeland issue is something that, as I say, one can understand from a certain practical perspective why, as I say, Turkey is unhappy about it. But at the same time, you can understand that it's gone about proclaiming that policy in a very, very unhelpful way that is very confrontational, that raises all sorts of other issues. So, rather a long question to answer to the question, but yes, I think it is certainly there. Can I just say one thing actually, also on the broad approach to this? I mean, I think we're talking about Turkey as a middle-sized actor. And the country that I really more and more think about that I think there's so many interesting parallels with, including some very, very clear differences, of course, is India. That I think many of the drivers of Indian foreign policy in terms of a vision for itself, the way that it's responding to a national sentiment of we could be so much more than we are, and the world doesn't respect us, and we have to go out and do what's right for us, with very little internalization that it's about relationships. That you can pursue your own national goals, but you've got to work with partners, and you've got to be sure who those partners are. And I mean, we see this with India. We're seeing at the moment India that is cozying up to Russia at a time when the West is saying, look, Ukraine is a fundamental security concern for us. Russia's behavior is absolutely unacceptable, and India is buying as much Russian oil as it can possibly lap up. But at the same time, India is saying, oh, but we want the West to side with us over China. And it's a member of the Quad. A quite clear Indo-Pacific relationship which brings in Japan, Australia, and the United States. And I think that there's a sense of mistrust, and this is very much a sense of, I have as well with Turkey, that it's saying for its own internal reasons, we've got to do what's right for us, people don't respect us. And yes, I understand the concern about the way that it's been treated by Europe. But as I say, I just get this sort of sense, and that's certainly my feeling, that if you want a parallel, which is the country that really stands out, it would be India.
Okay, I think the Indian situation is more complicated, but we're not here to talk about India. We can talk about that.
No, I'm just saying
that later.
To be honest, psychological drivers behind it.
Okay, I want to come back now to you, Pinar, because we've talked a bit about the EU, but I want to move to the United States, where there's also been a problematic let's say, quite a tense relationship between Turkey and Washington. We also now have, in a couple of weeks, these US elections, which are going to be critically important. I mean, first for the Americans, but also for the rest of the world. How do you view, the relationship, or potentially a future relationship if President Trump or former President Trump is re-elected? What could this mean for Turkey-US relations, and also, for the broader European security issue?
Yeah, I would like to talk about that, but later, if you give me also some opportunity to add upon Professor Eralp's presentation, I would like to, because she touched upon very important issues, but I have a couple of more afterwards. So regarding Turkey-US relations, this relationship was always very difficult, had their ups and downs, but we saw the lowest, I believe, after the failed coup attempt in 2016. And even though many people think that under Trump the relationship will be easy, we saw the most difficult problems under Trump presidency in Turkey. We can talk about what were they, but we see some improvement since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think this is due first to U.S. realization that how Turkey's geostrategic location was important regarding vis-a-vis a revisionist Russia first, and second, Sinem touched upon Turkey's foreign policy, the chronology, and it's true that since 2021, Turkey ended its ideologic foreign policy, maybe because of the conditions obliged to this, and started a normalization process with all U.S. main allies in the Middle East and also in the Eastern Mediterranean. But also, I believe U.S. also sees Turkey's increasing influence, at least Turkey's willingness to play a role in the neighborhood. So I believe the latest developments in the Middle East, especially with the escalation of violence in Lebanon and now a potential Iran-Israel war, Turkey's position is becoming even more important. I would like to remind that Turkey is hosting Kirejik radar station. This is the core of the entire anti-ballistic missile system defending against Iran. And I believe Turkey's place to stop Iranian influence in the region, it's important because Turkey was fighting Iran both in Syria and Iraq for many years. Even though it's not so much on the agenda, people doesn't talk about it. Iran is a real competitor for Turkey. So those are main general issues. When it comes to the bilateral issues with importance to Euro-Atlantic security, there are a couple of issues I would like to mention. First, CAATSA sanctions imposed by the US in 2019 after Turkey's acquiring S-400 Russian defense system. Yeah. Second is Turkey's exclusion from F-35 joint strike fighter program. And third, the delayed deal to buy 40 new F-16 and 79 renovation kits. And last but not least, obviously the Syria issue. US support to YPG-led SDF in Syria is a main issue of discord between both countries. So I would like to first mention how these issues harm Turkey and also Euro-Atlantic security. In the CAATSA sanctions, you have some clauses which require US to oppose to any international financial institution loan for Turkey's defense industry agency, which threaten Turkey-EU cooperation for advanced weapons platform production, first. Second, there's another clause in the CAATSA sanctions banning the export of license, preventing the supply, but also exports to third countries of spare parts for US-made weapon system. Disarm not only Turkey's exports, but also Turkey's defense industry itself. Because as Sinem pointed out, Turkey is depending on US, Western important weapon systems. Regarding the F-35, it's true that already 100 F-35 that Turkey has ordered and will not be able to take, it's a very important issue. But in addition to that, the loss estimated around $9 billion that Turkey's defense companies were estimated to gain because Turkey's defense companies were producing around 900 parts of the F-35s. So this is a huge financial loss for Turkish economy, Turkey's exports, as the country became the 12th largest export country, but also for bilateral US-Turkish trade, because Turkey fell from the 7th largest US weapons buyer to 27th largest US weapons buyer. So it's huge. Coming to the future US president, how it will affect. I mean, it will affect everyone, but especially if Trump comes. So in case Trump is in power, I think US may choose to end the war in Ukraine more abruptly in the benefit of Russia. And this will, Turkey will welcome the end of hostilities, but will not welcome a more powerful Russia in the Black Sea. This is for sure. In such a scenario, I would think EU and Turkey become closer in the security and defense policies of for EU and Europe. But obviously the biggest problem in Turkish-US relations is Syria. So what will be the US-Syria policy if Trump comes? Actually, we were talking before October 7, I would say, and we were all hypothesizing about US withdrawal from Syria and what kind of scenarios can happen. I don't expect this anymore. I mean, whether under Trump or Harris, the US cannot withdraw from Syria now.
Yeah,
and but it's true that under Trump, at least a plan for withdrawal in a couple of years can be done. In which case, Turkey's role to check Iranian influence will be important. Actually, Syria will be continuing to be a headache for Turkey for many years to come, I believe. And this is the reason why Turkey was trying to normalize with Assad recently, but also in order to prevent the creation of a federal government by SDF, or in order to distract this autonomous administration in northwest Syria. And we've been also seeing some European countries trying to normalize with Assad. So we may expect a kind of normalization and cooperation between EU and Turkey for normalizing with Assad, and maybe in exchange asking Assad to limit Iranian influence as well in Syria. So this is what I expect in the...
Thank you. Not very optimistic, huh? Maybe we can stay on the topic of European security. I mean, it was already mentioned a couple of times. I mean, the EU itself is going through a sort of evolution at the moment in recognizing its need to be more responsible for its own security. Unfortunately, to me, there seems to be more slogans and words rather than concrete actions, although they've come up with some new policies. For me, it's a non-brainer that Turkey should be part of this process, because there's no European security without Turkey. There's no European security without Ukraine. Do you see there could be a change in the approach of the EU in terms of allowing Turkey to be part of some of these new defense and security initiatives? I mean, PESCO was mentioned, but there's also there's a big dynamic now for cooperation between different defense sectors. And it would make perfect sense for Turkey to be part of that process. I mean, Ukraine is being brought in. So will Europe see the light, if I can put it that way, and finally change their position vis-à-vis Turkey and European security?
That's a great question, to which I don't have an answer, but if we had this panel next year, I might have
some answers.
Because the reason is the following. I'm currently leading a project at CATS where we actually look at Turkey's role or non-role in an emerging European security architecture. And what we do is that we commission country reports to kind of figure out, and the way we organize it is that we want to understand first and foremost the threat perception of different EU member states when it comes to European security, because the threat perception of Eastern European countries might very well be different from, for instance, threat perceptions of Spain or Italy when it comes to an imagined European security architecture. Secondly, we want to understand how different EU member states, as well as Turkey, by the way, we will also have a report on Turkey, how they look at the institutional pillars of an emerging European security architecture. And that basically means that, are we going to stick to NATO as it is? Are we going to work on kind of an enhanced European pillar within NATO? And then how do we define European in that case, whether Turkey is in it or not? Or it's just going to be the European structures. I mean, PESCO, going back to your question, I don't see that happening, at least in the short term.
Yeah,
but I agree with you that first and foremost, obviously Turkey is NATO's second largest army. It's basically operational capabilities, military capacity, but also on-the-ground experience for the good and the bad reasons that a lot of European armies lack. So for operational reasons, I think it makes sense from a pragmatic perspective to have a place for Turkey in an emerging European security architecture. But the problem to me is kind of like beyond almost like the technical and the military aspect, and it's more of a political question at the end of the day. And then it boils down to the issue of trust and the threat perception, to what extent the threat perceptions among the actors would align or not align. But hopefully next year we can have the conversation again and I can tell you something more concrete.
Yeah, I look forward to reading the paper. So maybe we can continue with you, Nilgün, again on the EU dossier, because you mentioned, the Gimlik meeting where Hakan Fidan was there. Apparently everybody had a very nice time and enjoyed a good meal. But is there any potential positive follow-up to this? I mean, it's obvious, for me at least, that the EU has finally recognized the importance of having a strategic dialogue with Turkey on different parts of the world. I mean, whether it's the Western Balkans, the South Caucasus, or the Middle East. That wasn't the case before, but this was one of the main reasons for this gathering in Brussels, actually, to pick Hakan Fidan's brains about regional developments.
Yes.
But is there any chance we are going to see movement on any of our area? And could potentially more sort of focus on bilateral relations between Ankara and different member states actually help improve the dynamic and change something?
It's difficult to give an exact answer, but I mean, what Turkey has been demanding from EU was a structural dialogue on strategic issues. But EU prefers to ad hoc dialogues and subject-based dialogues. That's not what Turkey wanted. As far as I learned during the Gimlik meeting at the end of August, I mean, some member states claimed their willingness to have cooperation with Turkey on foreign and security issues, but that was not an EU decision. So we haven't witnessed forward steps in this area. I don't know, of course, it depends on many factors whether we can see steps towards the direction. It depends on EU, it depends on Turkey, and I mean, most important than all, it depends on the main factor that prevents the parties to cooperate, especially on foreign and security issues, lack of mutual trust. We have to overcome that. Both parties have to overcome that. Unfortunately, until now, we haven't witnessed a concrete event that would make the parties to overcome this lack of mutual trust. And I know Turkey's mistakes in this case, I mean, because Turkey has very unpredictable foreign policy. One day, I mean, it bashes Egypt, and next day the Sisi, Egyptian president, is welcomed in Turkey at the highest level. So we don't know. But EU has its own mistakes as well. I mean, we, the people who are supporters of universal values, unfortunately witness some EU member states having double standards, like in Ukraine, that was the humanitarian crisis. What Russia is doing is against international humanitarian law, but what Netanyahu is doing in Gaza is not against humanitarian law. Of course, there are some countries like Spain, Belgium, that stand against Netanyahu's stance. So these double standards of EU in Gaza war, in its migration and asylum pact, pushing back the applicants for asylum to the countries where there's governed by autocratic rules. I just referred to that: Mauritania, Tunisia, Egypt, and EU didn't care about how these countries treated the illegal migrants. The main example is Tunisia. So this double standard strengthened the hands of the anti-EU people in Turkey, unfortunately. So for the moment, I cannot envisage a structural cooperation in foreign and security policy between Turkey and the EU, but there can be cooperation on ad hoc basis, and Turkey is also willing to make bilateral deals with some EU countries. Until now, not an EU country, unfortunately, but with a European country, UK, they signed a letter of intent for, I don't know, maybe it was 2022, regarding a defense cooperation. Turkey wants to have such a deal with Germany, but until now, Germany has been resistant to structure such a deal. France is very much willing to send weapons to, sell weapons to Turkey, but they are not willing to have a defense cooperation with Turkey. So it is difficult. Maybe I will not have the chance to talk about customs union modernization. Shall I have a few words? Shall I say a few words on that? Customs union modernization was the brainchild of not Turkey, but Commission, European Commission asked World Bank as an independent organization to prepare a report how the existing customs union is functioning and how can it be modernized. But unfortunately, EU hasn't given the mandate to the European Commission to initiate negotiations because they regarded, first they said it's because of the backsliding in democracy, rule of law, and human rights in Turkey. And then they said, no, the precondition is not these, but Turkey should open its ports and airports to Cyprus Republic. Now, the precondition change, it is creating the environment conducive for the Cyprus, the problem to the solution to the Cyprus problem. I think it's a big mistake because EU member states think that initiating negotiations for a modernized customs union will be a gift to an Erdogan. No, it will be a test to Erdogan's willingness to reform because modernized customs union will mean also to have a rule-based economy, to transparent public procurement, transparent state aid. I wish the EU could wise to initiate negotiations because conditions can be put on Turkey during the negotiations. At the end of the negotiations, anyway, European Parliament has to give its approval. Then conditions can be laid upon in different stages. It was a big mistake, I think, customs union modernization, not initiating negotiations for customs union modernization. I'll stop here.
Thank you. We have about half an hour, so I would like to take some questions from you guys. So, any questions? No? Okay, yeah. Yes, two brave guys. Go ahead.
Center. Yeah, it is.
And I wonder, how do you see this? Do you see this panel members as an opportunity for Turkey? There's a meeting coming up, if I'm not wrong, in November in Hungary. And also, speaking about Hungary, how do you see the Hungarian-Turkish relationship in terms of the future of Turkey and
Okay, I'll take the second question that was there.
Thank you for the insightful thoughts and comments. Not so many Cypriots are here at this
They're exhausted.
panel, but thankfully we have it's broadcasted, and maybe this will be an asset for the domestic politics. If someone has the opportunity to see this afterwards. And saying this, before you mentioned about how the domestic politics are influencing the Turkey's foreign policy. And I'm thinking like somehow to enhance this knowledge about how it will be evolved further. For how long do you think this, let's say, rhetoric against Israel's and okay, the conflict in Gaza and in Lebanon. For how long?
For how long?
President Erdogan's and AKP's, you know, this rhetoric against Israel can keep up, you know, and helping them keeping the power there. Or it's just they are waiting for the next step, the end of the conflict, the winning of one side or the other. Is there like their strategy?
There's a strategy.
Addressing these two countries.
Okay, maybe we'll start from
Yes.
Nadia.
So I would like to just comment shortly on the EPC. I think it's a French-inspired idea, like the other first, Eastern Med Union for the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And I think the idea was, as Europe was not ready to take Ukraine, so transitory process of creating something. Turkey attended the first meeting. I know that France originally didn't want, but UK said that if Turkey doesn't come, UK won't be part. So this is how Turkey attended the first meeting, and they didn't attend the second. I don't expect anything from this organization. If I have time afterwards, I would like to talk about European Turkey partnership, security and defense partnership within NATO.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely, yeah, absolutely. Let's just come.
So we just heard last week Secretary Stoltenberg.
Yeah, can we just come
Sure,
back
sure,
to that after
sure,
we just
sorry.
addressed the question? Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I'll pick the question on Gaza. There are a couple of issues. First is the Palestine, the rights of Palestinians and Palestinian state has always been a very passionate file for Turkish Islamists. And one should keep in mind that Erdogan comes out of the nationalist outlook movement. So that's kind of the one aspect of, I think, the kind of the positioning of Turkey vis-a-vis the war. And since the AKP's rise into power, there have been three components of its policy on Israel-Palestine. One is what I mentioned earlier, kind of positioning Turkey as a democracy promoter in the region. And the rhetoric has always been that Hamas is an elected political party. So there is nothing new, actually, in what they are saying at the moment. And basically, the reference point is the 2005, I believe, or 6 elections. That was also identified by the Middle East Quartet at the time as a free and a fair election. So that's kind of where the origins of the idea of not seeing Hamas as a terrorist organization is embedded in. Second, the Israel-Palestine file has also been one of the prominent files for Turkey's mediation efforts, through which it's kind of, I think, tries to enhance its middle power status or regional power status. And it did it in the previous conflicts. It did it in 2008-9, the shuttle diplomacy of Davutoglu, etc. And Ankara tried to do it after October 7 as well, but significantly failed. And the reason for that is, of course, actually, October 7 came in a very bad moment for Ankara, because as it is trying to normalize relations with Israel, but given the history of its engagement with Israel-Palestine, I think it was almost clear from the beginning that it cannot really play the balancing act that it played in Black Sea between Russia and Ukraine. It also didn't have the instruments to do that, because in the Black Sea, both the NATO membership and the Monroe Convention are significant instruments through which Turkey could play a balancing act between the two actors. When it comes to the Eastern Mediterranean, i.e. the Israel-Palestine, neither the instruments are there nor the leverage is there. So it couldn't play. But the irony there is that after basically 15 years of full policy trying to position Turkey as a regional hegemon in the Middle East, you basically suddenly find yourself as a marginal actor when the moment of conflict erupts. So that's kind of like and I think partially the kind of the severity of the rhetoric also comes from that frustration, in my opinion. So there is but there is also another frustration, and that has to do with the fact that post-October 7 era brought US back to the region. And I don't think Ankara is very happy with it. And now, of course, with the escalation is continuing. So that kind of I think there is a certain level of, in addition to frustration, also not knowing how to move on, in the sense that because, I mean, on the one hand, I totally agree with Pinar that especially since April, 1st of April, the attack of Israel, of the Iranian embassy in Syria, and then what came afterwards, because in a way that kind of shows the limits of Iran, right? The vulnerabilities of Iran. And Turkey might see an opportunity there in terms of that, with the assumption that it might weaken Iranian influence in the region, particularly Syria and Iraq, the two files that are very important for Turkey's security dossier. But at the same time, I think, and this is more of a speculation, it might have also disrupting Turkey's assumptions about the international order. And by that, I mean the following. Turkey, up until recently, has been working with the assumption that the West is in decline, and the challengers are strong enough to challenge. Now, I think what's happening since April 1st is, again, this is not in absolute terms, but in relative terms. That picture might not necessarily fit into what's happening in the region. So in that sense, from a kind of geopolitical, geostrategic perspective, I think the moment is a little bit, it comes as it requires a little bit, I think, more strategic thinking in terms of what it means for the Turkish foreign and security policy. I will start with one last point, because you asked whether there is a strategy. There is also the domestic dimension, of course, because the decision, for instance, to halt trade with Israel came after the local elections in Turkey. Like Erdogan and most of the officials in Ankara, it was mostly rhetorical, the response. And I think it has to do with the fact that a rival political party that came within the Islamist camp was one of the factors for the significant loss of the AKP, particularly in Anatolian cities that are historically and traditionally the stronghold of the AKP. And this party, which actually joined Erdogan's alliance in last year's elections, made a list of requests a week before the local elections. Stop trade with Israel, stop Kırıcık radar station, there were two others I don't remember right now, and said, if you do these things, I'm ready to withdraw my candidates and will support your candidates. But the interesting thing is that if we go with the assumption that domestic politics plays a role, Erdogan didn't do it before the election. And then that begs the question, why? Did he basically misread what the election outcome would be? But given that, I think the decision, probably he misread what the election outcome would be, and that the decision came after the elections, I think also speaks to the influence of the domestic factors in some of the decisions taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have nothing to add what Sinem said regarding Turkey's stance, anti-Israel stance. But I want to add that, I mean, having a pro-Palestine stance is not only confined to Islamist circles in Turkey. I mean, during my youth, leftists also supported Palestine. They believe in the self-determination of Palestine, and even some leftists were trained in PLO camps in Palestine when I was in the university. Regarding EPC, I will be a bit blunt. Sorry, European political community is nothing else than a talking shop. It was created, it was the brainchild of Macron after Ukraine's and Moldova's and Georgia's application for full membership. As full membership cannot be given to these countries right away, they wanted to create a platform for them, but it's no more than a talking shop. How can you bring 48 countries, if I'm not wrong, together for one day, and what kind of an outcome you can expect? Regarding the relation between Hungary and Turkey, there's kind of love relationship between Orban and Erdogan. I think Erdogan likes Orban because Orban's Hungary weakens Europe. And it is, I mean, weakens Europe, and this proves Europe's statement that they are the supporter of universal values. So I think Erdogan likes Orban for that. I mean, for Orban, I think because I think Erdogan's regime and Orban's regime are more or less similar. And I cannot understand Erdogan that much because Hungary in the EU is the most anti-Muslim country in the EU. So it's not easy to understand Erdogan in that sense. I don't think there's a strategy of Turkey towards Israel at the moment. Turkey, for a while, before this real aggression of Israel started, was thinking about reconstruction of, because now the current administration in Turkey loves construction projects. They were very much interested in the reconstruction of Gaza, but that idea is not there anymore, I think.
I just have to chip in on the Hungary-Turkey thing, because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a bizarre relationship in already, and you raised the great point that, you know, Turkey is cozying up with Orban, who is taking the most stridently anti-Muslim position in Europe. You're absolutely right. And I do often wonder, because obviously Turkey applied to join the Organization of Turkic States, that how when those leaders get together and they see Orban there, what they're thinking about, who is he, why is he here, you know, is Hungary really Turkic? I've never been able to get a clear steer on that. I think on the Israel thing, this has been really fascinating because, of course, you know, this is a fascinating relationship from the 1940s, and then we had that sort of golden era here in Cyprus, which I have to say I sort of look at with a degree of fascination how Cyprus has built up its relationship with Israel, considering that in the 1990s, Israel was a hate country here because of its close relationship with Turkey. You know, people here just, you know, were overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian, and it seems to have all been forgotten and neglected. And now Israel's Cyprus's great friend. But what I also think was really interesting was that you know, you had this terrible relationship that evolved in the Mavi Marmara and everything. And then you had a period of rapprochement between Turkey and Israel, that it suddenly looked that they were fixing their relationship. Exactly. You had a very high-profile visit by the Israeli president to Ankara. He was welcomed by Erdogan. It seemed that let's forget the past. And then as soon as things turned again, Turkey took this very strident public position, how much I think was raised in private as to whether that was. And I think this has also contributed to the sense that how trustworthy is Erdogan as a partner, that he'll just blow with the wind. He'll take one position, and then as soon as it's politically expedient for whatever reason, he'll turn on allies. He did this with Assad in the past.
Exactly.
You know, we saw at the start of the Syrian civil war that, you know, Turkey went through a very bad period with Damascus in 1998 over Öcalan. You saw the relationship was built up, and then as soon as the Arab Spring broke out, it was right, okay, I'm going to turn on Assad. And I don't think even to this day, any of us have a proper answer as to why that happened exactly. It just suddenly came from the blue, and I think what we're seeing time and time again is Erdogan just turning on people. And I think that many people look at this with a great deal of suspicion. The final thing I'd like to just say, which I think is a really interesting factor in all of this, and you know, just showing the utter complexity of international relations at the moment, of course, is that, you know, we are looking at what's happening between Israel and Iran, and I think that there is a very real danger that we're going to see an all-out war between them, simply because Israel might have just decided it's not willing to put up with this proxy war anymore with Hezbollah and Hamas. It can keep going back into Lebanon. This will be the third time it's done it. It'll withdraw again. Hezbollah will build up again. At some point, the only way you're going to deal with this is to take on Tehran. And I think that that's the real danger that we're looking at. But there's a fascinating other country that ties into all of this, which is Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
And the close relationship that exists between Israel and Azerbaijan, and the role that Israel played in helping Azerbaijan to retake Nagorno-Karabakh. And many felt that Azerbaijan was going to become that crucial interlocutor between Israel, between Turkey, and rebuild that relationship. It hasn't happened now, but one does wonder if, as Israel acts against Tehran for any reason, whether Azerbaijan, which has had its own problems with Tehran, will seize that opportunity as well, grant it airspace access or base rights for drones, for example. There's all sorts of things, and how that'll play in at Turkey and everything. So we're dealing with an unbelievably complex situation at the moment.
Very complex. I was thinking of Azerbaijan as well, because I heard several times that Ankara was rather upset with President Aliyev for throwing his support behind Israel. I know you want to come back on the security issue, but I just want to take the question here, and then we can go. Okay, maybe we'll...
I'd be keen to hear what others say,
Okay, maybe we'll start with you, Pinar, and we'll come back to you, James, because we have 7 minutes left.
Yes, sort of aware that we...
So first on the Nagorno-Karabakh war, if I may add, Turkey also jointly helped a lot Azerbaijan. So, and Israeli and Turkish drones for the first time were used jointly, and Turkish and Israeli military officers trained Azeris together. And that's how Azerbaijan helped facilitate the relationship. Regarding other normalization, I'm not an expert, but all are going well because Turkey needed very much cash entry. And the relationship with UAE, Saudi Arabia, was very much, I believe, in terms of diversifying economic resources. And especially with drones production, Turkey, I believe, is also helping UAE with a drone factory, and they've been also talking about the same issues with Saudi Arabia. So this is what I can add. But the relationship is going well with other countries, as far as I know.
I would agree. Of course, they still compete in different theaters, particularly UAE, Turkey, and Egypt, Turkey. I would say that after Turkey turned away from the Muslim Brotherhood, that is no longer an as thorny issue as it used to be. And especially with the two Gulf states, some people describe it as strategic. The rapprochement has taken a strategic level. I'm not sure. But I see why there might be the tendency to define it as such, mainly because of what Pinar alluded to, because of the depth of because it's not only about selling drones. It's really more than that. And I think there the interests of both Turkey, both economic, but also the needs in defense industry, overlap with both Gulf states, first and foremost, ambition to diversify their economy, and defense industry is clearly one of the sectors that they heavily invest in doing that. But also, we talked a lot about strategic autonomy, so it basically applies to both Gulf states as well, at least rhetorically, like Vision 2030, like now Saudi Arabia has the ambition to, more than 50% of its defense industry, homegrown, local, etc. So I think if those defense ties turn into a format through which there is a regional, that contributes to a regional, the construction of a regional defense ecosystem, that might be sustainable through that tie. But I think we are still too early, at least as far as I'm concerned, we still need to see how it evolves and to what extent the countries are also able to align their strategic interests. I think that would be, to what extent it would be coherent. So, to be seen, I would say.
I don't think there's a strategy behind these recent rapprochement efforts of Turkey. It's conjunctural, I think, and regarding Turkey's rapprochement with the Gulf countries and Saudi Arabia, the main factor behind it is economic. Turkey urgently needs funds, but Turkey was disappointed regarding the inflow of funds from these countries, and that's why Turkey's rhetoric against West is not that bad nowadays. Regarding, also I want to say one more thing with this. Turkey can never give up its alliance with the West for the moment because of the economic factors that I just mentioned. And Turkey urgently needs foreign direct investment, and the funds coming from the Gulf countries, they are not coming for direct investment. But the foreign direct investment comes from the European countries, mainly from Netherlands, Germany, UK, etc. Also, some people claim that Turkey's application, kind of refused application to BRICS, is to make use of the funds of there's an investment bank of BRICS. Although their resources are limited, some people claim that the main reason behind this application is this necessity to have funds. So I don't think there's any strategy behind this rapprochement. And as James mentioned, Turkey's efforts are very unpredictable. It can change anytime. I think these are my last words. I would criticize EU and the West because during the Arab awakenings, European Union especially presented Turkey as a model for these worlds. It could be a source of inspiration, but it could never be a model. So they just exaggerated, and they didn't see the potential problems lying in Turkey. I just wanted to criticize you for that.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes, James.
At the risk of being simplistic, I'd just say on the question of rapprochement, they're going well until something happens. Erdogan decides that he's going to be unpredictable, and they're not going well.
Okay, thank you. I think we can wrap up this session. I think what I've learned that most of Turkish foreign policy is very unpredictable, except the relationship with the EU, which is predictably, bad. I would like to really thank all of our speakers. I think we covered numerous topics which actually all deserve to go into much more details, and you all did an amazing job with excellent insights. So thank you for joining us, and thanks for the audience for joining, because this was quite the graveyard shift. I hope you found it interesting. I certainly did. And please keep your eye on Turkish foreign policy. It's never boring.
It's definitely never boring.
Thank you.